start with your topic. It is regarding the glance security issue, which is public now.
Okay, thanks. I keep going back and forth. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I don't have my headphones on.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. All right, great. Um, yeah, so I keep going back and forth whether this is I mean, it's a big deal for Glance, but whether it even matters for us, I keep going back and forth. So the issue is, so it's sort of related to that Glance issue, but so you can configure Cinder so that it will use the same backend as Glance. And this can either be because of the way the driver works or because you use the Cinder Glance store. And the idea is that this makes things super fast because the images are already stored as volumes. So when somebody wants a bootable volume, you just do a clone and bam, there you go. Now, the issue is so in the normal flow where you don't have that kind of shared backend, what would happen is we would stream an image out of Glance, and then the Glance client does checksumming. So it uses, by default now, it's like SHA-512. So it will checksum the image as it's streaming, and then if it doesn't match what's recorded as the hash value for the image, it'll fail the download. So that's kind of nice, because at least you have, so you know something didn't happen in transit. Now, when we do it directly in the back end, we don't check the hash, which sort of makes sense because the image is already there. It's not going anywhere. There's no way for somebody to intercept it, between the Glance backend and the Cinder backend because it's in the same place. But on the other hand, I don't know if you're vulnerable to, if somebody does get access to the backend, they could modify the image, and then we would not know it as image consumers because we're just cloning whatever's there. So maybe that's a big deal, maybe it's not. I just don't, it depends on, when I was at Rackspace, I had to fill out a questionnaire about security in the cloud and where there were opportunities for interference to happen and how we mitigated those. And it was for some kind of security certification or something. I don't even remember what. So that, yeah, Gorka.
Yeah, I think that if this is a problematic thing for a specific deployment, you just need to disable it. It's not like Cinder and Glance enforce this and you have to do it. So you can just say, I think this is problematic, so I don't use it. If not, you have two different APIs on Glance and you do the fast way. Because otherwise, if we start taking everything out, every optimization, just in case somebody does something, it is going to be really slow, everything.
I agree. And I think, so I'm wondering whether it's just like maybe in the documentation, make it a little, I mean, it's kind of obvious when you look at it that what we're doing is we're just cloning stuff in the back end. So, I mean, if it's important for some workload or something, you could, have a different back end, since Cinder can have multiple ones, where, or use it, have a special one for Glance, right? So that you have to do the checksumming or something. But yeah, if we're getting rid of the optimization, does not seem to be an interesting thing. And yeah, now the other thing is with the image signature verification. So if the image, so there's an ability to store certificates and stuff in Barbican. And you can upload an image, you can store the hash for the image, you'd link to the certificate, And then Nova and Cinder both have the ability to check these on download to see if the signature is verified before you proceed with creating the image or making a bootable disk or whatever. And the problem is, well, I don't know if this is a problem. We explicitly don't do signature verification if we've got one of these copy on write backend configurations. So even if the signature data is there on the image, we don't check it. And maybe that's okay. I don't know. It seems like that's a case where if somebody actually puts the signature verification on the image, then maybe we should always check it. I'm just not sure.
But I'm a bit lost. Is this a different case than the previous one that we were discussing?
Sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. The only relation is that it's a vaguely security related thing having to do with the image data integrity.
But here, in what is this scenario that we are not checking?
So
Glance has the image with the information, right?
So basically what happens is on one code path, you can have it so that the image is downloaded from Glance and the image signature is verified. So not just the hash, but the actual signature is verified. And then the volume is either created or not, depending on the setting. But even if the signature's been recorded, if we are using like the Cinder backend for Glance, then what Cinder always does is if you're creating a volume from an image, first thing it does is check to see, can I just do a fast clone of this? So it goes through, checks to see what the driver is, whether it's one of the drivers that implements that method. And then if it doesn't, it checks to see the Glance locations to see if there's a Cinder store. And then if that's the case, it tries to do it. And then only in the last case does it actually go ahead and do the download. But with the image signature verification, it will only do the signature verification if it actually has to stream the image.
But that is the same case that we were saying before. It's basically, if we are doing an optimized path, then there is no signature verification because then there is no optimization if we try to do it. But it's the same case. It doesn't matter if it's the driver that implements it or if it's the case where Glance is using Cinder. It's the same scenario. It's if we do the optimization, then there is no signature. If you don't want that to happen, disable optimization.
Okay, so it's just a documentation.
In the end, it's not different. Let me put it another way. How is it different from the Cinder image cache case where we download, we say, oh, the signature is fine. We create the image cache, and now somebody goes and modifies that image cache volume. So when we clone from it, because it's a cache, we get something that has been manipulated externally. Then we would also have to disable that because they can do that. But then if we keep disabling everything that does optimization by not transferring data, we end up with garbage because then everything is terribly slow. So I think it's just a matter of documenting. If you want to use this feature everywhere, disable image cache. Don't allow this thing. Don't allow Glance to expose this. Don't allow Cinder to do this. It's basically, if you are paranoid, everything is going to be slower, and this is what you need to disable.
Okay. That seems fine. Now, the only other thing, the other issue with the image signature verification was that an update was made to, so what happens is we just grab the certificate out of Barbican and use that. We don't check to see if it's a trusted signature. we just, so, you know, we just check it is there, and so it's valid. Um, the functionality in Nova was changed so that you can store a default chain of trust in Nova, but also at the time you go to boot the image, you can give it the list of certificates that you do trust, and then it will check to see if the certificate that you need to use to actually do the signature verification is in the chain of trust. So I think that's probably something we should do also, but since nobody's asked for it, I think maybe it would be like a good intern task. So maybe we should just file this as a bug and write it up. There's an implementation in Nova, so they could just sort of follow it along. I think what would happen is we need a new API microversion because you'd have to supply that stuff. But we could just make it consistent with whatever Nova does. But that's
And
it.
one question.
Sure.
If we receive it from the API, this information, would we store it as well as metadata or admin metadata or something for reference? I mean, because this is additional input. Otherwise, somebody can come later and say, hey, this should have failed. Because if I do it, I run the command, it fails. And we have to say, no, it is failing for you because originally the other one that succeeded had this additional information during creation, right?
Yeah, I don't know what Nova does about that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess it would make sense to store it. I guess what we could do is store it as volume metadata or something. So we wouldn't have to, monkey with the database too much. But we should. You're right. We should probably. Yeah, we'll have to look to see what Nova does and do something similar. They've probably done that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that makes sense to add that feature. I mean, at least have the bug explaining this has not been implemented. Nova did it. Here's the Nova code, and
all right. Yeah, and then I think so as long as there is a way to configure Cinder in a way that bypasses optimizations and gives you the security. I guess it's one of these things where, if somebody compromises the back end, you're kind of hosed no matter what, right? But okay. All right, thanks. That was all I had to talk about.
So I had some things regarding this point. So Brian, do we actually use this internal and external endpoint concept in any deployment as of now? Like any deployment tool doing this?
I do not know. I mean, when I was at Rackspace, we had internal and external glances for different reasons. So I know it's possible to do this, but I don't know that any O doesn't have a setup where it allows you to have two different glances configured differently. I do know that.
We are doing it right now in POCs for running this on Kubernetes or OpenShift, and we are deploying glance split into two different pods, one for internal, one for external, and Cinder is linked to the internal one.
Yeah, and there'll probably be some changes with the way Glance handles the image locations, but the problem is backward compatibility. We can break a lot of stuff. It was just not a really well designed thing, I don't think. On the other hand, it works pretty well, so I don't know.
I don't understand what you say that it could break the
well, so there are various workflows where you're allowed to. So one of the proposals is that the way to fix this is that Glance will not allow a location to be added unless it has checksummed the data. which is going to be problematic, I think, because it's right. The efficiency problem is that if it's got to be streamed, it's to compute the hash. You get a time lag, or so currently people can snapshot an instance in Nova and immediately use that snapshot to create more instances. And if this happens, then they won't be able to do that. So that's part of the problem. And then the other thing is there are a few additions that were made to that API that allow you to add locations and to add checksum data. And I'm not sure how those would interact with some of the proposals for how to handle this. So
Out
I'm
of
being vague, sorry.
curiosity,
Yeah.
are you saying that the current approach that Glance is taking will break Nova's instance snapshot?
No, it would make it behave radically differently though if you turned it on, and it would possibly hose your glance nodes. Because what would happen is you
How?
would not. Oh, what would
No,
happen
please,
is
please.
what would happen is instead of the snapshot being instantaneously available to create instances from, there'd be some time lag, which would be the amount of time it would take Glance to actually stream the data to compute a checksum for it, and then record.
But the fun stuff is that they would need to create a volume from that snapshot, then attach the snapshot. Then attach the volume, then stream the volume, then delete the volume. For real?
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the things being floated. That's why we're kind of hard to get this made a public bug because it's going to need to be designed in the open with operators paying attention to what we're doing. Because, yeah.
Not to be rude, but my expectation on operators looking at this is Walter looking at this. I don't expect any other operator to actually look at it.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's the right.
was that a
But
cringe or a laugh, Walt?
Yes.
well, so what backend do you use for Glance, or do you not even interact with that?
Uh, uh, that's a good question. I think it's Swift.
Oh, okay. So then, yeah, then you're fine. So that's just sort of a normal setup.
I could check.
Well, define fine because the snapshot problem would still be the same.
Yeah, but you don't have the instantaneous expectation that you have currently. See, currently, if you set up with the cow, oh,
So the thing is that right now, if you tell you have a Nova instance that is using a Cinder volume, and you create a snapshot of that instance, what Nova does is just Cinder snapshot, create a glance image, and just say metadata. This is not a real image. This points to a Cinder snapshot. So if I understood correctly, you were saying that in those scenarios, Glance would actually want to check the contents of the snapshot.
right. But it's actually in the situation where you're just using an ephemeral disk in Nova. So right now, with the ephemeral disks,
In those cases, if you're using a ephemeral disk, what happens is that Nova actually streams the whole data to Glance. There's not, it is a slow thing, and data goes through the Glance API, and Glance can actually check whatever they need.
right? But
It's
also,
not fast.
no, it's also possible to use Ceph as the backing store for the ephemeral disks in Nova.
Oh,
So it's like another
okay.
optimization where you're sort of doing what we do with Cinder with the volumes, except it's happening all on the Nova side. So if you set it up that way, then you get the instantaneous availability of a snapshot, which would stop. If you're using like Swift as an object store and you're storing the images as objects, then you don't have the expectation of an immediate use of the snapshot. You're used to polling to wait for it to become available. So it's right. So behavior where stuff was really fast will suddenly not be fast anymore.
So if I understand correctly, in the scenario you're describing, which is Nova using RBD for ephemeral disk, they are not, what do they create in Glance? They point to the specific image, or they tell Glance the location of your image is over there. So
Right.
Glance has to blindly trust that.
Yeah. So it's right. So what happens is the image location gets set on the image, but there's no size and no checksum information. And so you get these zero size images that are showing up in Glance, but they're really not zero size. So.
But wouldn't Nova be actually able to tell the size?
Probably, but I think there's a restriction in Glance because we don't allow the size to be set by anyone, right? Because Glance only wants to set that when it's actually done it itself, and then it will set it. And the same thing with the hash values, except there was something merged when I was not PTL of Glance at this time. Something was merged that allows you, in the case of, you got a weird HTTP store, and there's some applications where people don't want to put their images in Glance for some reason, but they want it in a third location that's accessible by HTTP, but they want the images recordable in Glance so that Nova can consume them. And so in that case, Glance never sees the image at all, so there's no way for it to compute a checksum without downloading and doing it in the background or something. So there was some functionality added that allows you, I don't know if it's only for the HTTP store, but there's a way to add a hash value to the image record. And I don't know how that gets around. So that's where it starts to get tricky about in what situations you allow that. So in any case, Nova does not take advantage of that to set the size or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's several problems because you want to optimize, but you also don't want to open yourself up to security vulnerabilities that could be avoided.
Yeah, but if they can be avoided without the penalty of reading the whole volume for something that just to be fast. So similar to what we did in Cinder, that should be optional in the Glance side. I mean, you can, because otherwise somebody's going to upgrade and suddenly their whole cloud is going to be really, really slow.
Yeah.
So the default has to be, nope, it behaves the same way. It is efficient, maybe less secure, but efficient. If you want to go paranoid mode, there is how you change Glance and Cinder and everything. So maybe we need to describe this both in Cinder and Glance and link to the other side, or have some generic in OpenStack. If you want super secure, this is the link to Cinder, this is the link to Glance. There will be performance penalties. Read more on those projects. I don't know.
Yeah, and Glance can do multiple stores now. So you could have a Glance store, that was called paranoid mode store. And then that way you do the normal, you wouldn't do any of the optimizations, but you'd be checking everything in the way that's expected. Yeah.
So if this is related to that show multiple locations config option, which exposes the vulnerability to add, modify images. So I was working on this in the Z release. I think I wrote a spec in Glance for this to create new location APIs to remove the dependency of that config option, and
Mhm.
it also had this dependency of the service role because the service to service communication can happen in that way. So uh, yeah, is that like could also be an alternative option to this problem?
I I think so. I think I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I do think part of the problem is the way the locations are currently handled is kind of insane, um, and it's got to do with um, so Glance implemented the patch HTTP verb because it was like thought that that was going to be a thing when the Glance v2 API was designed. So the way to do the locations is to do just an image update, and you've got to sort through all this stuff. And I think it would be better to move the locations to a completely different API that you can restrict. Um, but we'll see what happens.
So yeah, at that time I checked like in the image update they check for this show multiple location, and then they do the context like the policy authorization, and in that so I think Nova and Cinder both just use the add location API of like call the image update to add the location and don't have
Yeah,
any other dependency. So initially I proposed 5 different APIs for this new location API spec, but it was narrowed down to I think one or two, uh, location add being the main one. So I think it is very minimal work. Like we could add one or two new APIs, and that could then we won't need this internal and external endpoints in
right.
deployments. And
Yeah, right. I think the problem's just going to be for existing applications that need to see the locations. Um, but it's one of those things where if it's you can break backward compatibility for good security reasons. Um, we'll just see what happens. But yeah, I remember your spec because I remember reading through that. Um, but it
yeah,
was never implemented, right? It's
yeah, it
those
was going to be implemented by Mridula. She recently joined Dance team, but she was very busy with other features as well. I think the duplicate download, like, I think there is a cache which had some issues. She was working
oh
on
right, okay, that's right.
that as well. And I think I talked to Abhishek, and he said like it is a good thing to implement last cycle, but I'm not sure if there was much progress. I agreed to work on the Cinder side of things. I
Okay,
think there are minimal changes on Cinder and Nova side, but mostly on the Glance side for this. Uh, so yeah, and another thing was like I was also working on this RBD upload volume to image feature,
hmm
which uh, introduces this dependency from Cinder to Glance. Like we do a copy on write clone on the Glance side, and it will just address like add that location. So that was also going to be benefited from this feature because again that would be require the show multiple locations, like another optimization which would require this.
right. So it's sort of similar to what Nova does under that one configuration, where it creates an image from an ephemeral disk just directly in the back end, and then adds the information. Um, yeah, so I think once it's figured out, what's the best way to do this, then we'll be able to proceed with all that stuff. So, um, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's all I had for this.
Yeah, and I guess we still have that thing about setting the virtual size that we could do in Cinder because we know exactly what it is. And I don't think there's a way to do that. Anyway, yeah. So there's plenty of room for collaboration with Glance to get this all shook out.
Is this also going to be discussed in the Glance PTG? Like, and
Probably. I hope so. But I haven't looked at the their operator hour is Thursday, I think, either Thursday or Friday. So I'm expecting this will come up then.
yeah.
But
I was thinking if we could get some time on Friday, then based on all the feedback of everyone, we could do a cross project between Glance and Cinder to, yeah, kind of try to
yeah,
finalize it. Yeah.
let me look at the Glance Etherpad real fast. Yeah, I think they'd be open to that for sure. Yeah, it looks like the Glance PTG is kind of light. So we could fit something in there.
It's from 1400 to 1700 UTC, like overlapping with us.
Yeah.
So I can talk to Pranali since she is in the same time zone as I am, like
Okay.
tomorrow morning, and see what she thinks about it.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so my action item from this is just I'll file a bug about this image signature code, just that we're not checking the certificates to see that the certificate is actually trusted in the way Nova does, and then we can just leave that there. But it sounds like, and then someone with spare time could work on a architecture document or something. I guess what I can do is look through the documentation again just to make sure it's clear, right, where you've got the optimization security trade-off, so that operators can make that kind of choice. But it doesn't sound like there's any work for us to do about this. That's it for me.
Thanks, Brian, for discussing this. I think, this security issue has been there for a long time. I think the show multiple locations config option was deprecated in Queens, and it's still not. Yeah, we were not
May
able
have
to.
been Newton. Is N before QR? Yeah, I think it's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, good to see some progress on this. Okay, I guess we can move on to the next topic. Then I will just update the Open Infra channel with the new next topic. Christian added another topic for today, and we will probably have time to discuss that. So I will leave that as it is, and we can discuss this after the current topic. Okay, I have updated the channel, and can someone press the spotlight button?
Done.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Walt, whenever you feel like you can start.
Oh, this one is me. Sorry, I've been migrating hundreds of volumes. Which one is this? Is this the cloud-like things with pools?
Yeah, that's not
Yeah.
cloud-like when pools are enabled,
Yes.
which makes sense because once
Very.
the cloud rains, you get a pool. It's not cloud-like anymore.
It's not. It's pool. It's a full pool with mosquitoes. Uh, so yes, this is one that I've been running into quite a lot, and why I'm feverishly migrating lots of volumes in 20 of our deployments. And uh, overall, we have about 2,600 pools across all of our deployments everywhere, and some of our regions and deployments have more than others. And the big value for our internal cloud, which SAP runs all of our products on our cloud now. And so we have to survive the cost of um, owning a lot of storage arrays. We use NetApps behind VMware, which is a ridiculously complicated and unnecessarily so setup. But because of limitations in VMware, um, uh, we things have turned out such that we've had to basically stack as much volumes in each pool. I keep saying data store. Data store and pools are the same thing for us. And so what ends up happening is we fill up our pools to utilize our storage as much as possible. And the size of our pools are limited based upon several things. One is VMware is the biggest one, and the NetApps behind it, and how much space we actually have available. And so what ends up happening is that in each deployment we have 30 or 40 pools available, and about 20 or 30% of those are completely empty and ready to accept volumes. But the others are totally full. And so what ends up happening in this scenario is that, we have customers that want to do a backup of their volume or a snapshot of their volume. And due to the way the VMware driver works is that backups and do snapshots, which is basically a full clone. And so we can't, and all of those fail because the pool is full. But there are plenty of other pools within the same exact backend that could house the request if Cinder would automatically migrate, and it doesn't. And from the customer standpoint, they don't care why it doesn't work. They just complain that it doesn't work and they want it to work. And that's the way, from my perspective, way back when we were working on Cinder feverishly in the very first parts of the life cycle of Cinder, is that it should be cloud-like and things should just work if possible. And prior to having pools available, there was just an aggregate of storage that was reported, and when that's full, it's obviously full. You can't do anything with it. At that point, it was assumed that your whole entire storage array was full, right? Well, we introduced these pools to slice it up for various reasons, and that's turned out to be a big win. But in this particular case, where a pool is full, Cinder just stops and gives up, and it turns into this very painful and time-consuming calisthenics that I have to go through, and the other members of the team has to go through to deal with, one, the customer being mad because their backups and snapshots don't work, and then they file a ticket, and that whole process goes through the levels of support, and eventually gets down to us like, okay, Cinder's not working. Well, it is working. There's no space left on that pool where that volume lives, so we have to move it manually. We've overcome this with respect to volume extensions. We introduced internally the ability to automatically migrate the volume which is being attempted to be extended. And so we send that to the scheduler. When the scheduler decides where it can live, it gets migrated if possible, and then the migration completes, and then we issue automatically the extend afterwards. So from the customer's perspective, it just works. It might just take a while, and that's okay because there's no way around that, right? That's the downside of having these migration take place automatically, is that the operation itself might take some time to complete. But it works. And we don't have to spend, as an operator, a lot of time dealing with angry customers that are starting to sour on their look on Cinder itself and asking for other options, such as going to hyperscalers because Cinder has this deep-rooted problem which, we can't readily fix easily. But I think we should look at how we can overcome this. And I've started looking at this a little bit because, we have a fork of Cinder effectively from Train, and I have like 140, 150 patches against it to deal with various limitations of VMware. I'll just leave it at that. And so one of the things that I've looked at is seeing if there's a way to automatically migrate in some of these cases where you're trying to snapshot a volume. Well, what do you do if there's existing snapshots on that volume? You're still kind of hosed, right? Because Cinder won't allow you to migrate or do much with a volume that has snapshots around. And rightfully so, because those snapshots are metadata that are pointers within the specific backend. And if you move it, then everything kind of just is garbage at that point, right? So, but in our case specifically, a snapshot is a full clone of the original source volume. So it can live anywhere and it wouldn't affect any of the operations. And I've actually tested this. I've created a snapshot of volume and I've moved it to a completely different pool, and I was able to create a volume from that snap and do other operations on the originating source volume, and that all works. But there's no mechanism within Cinder to say, hey, Cinder, allow migrations for these types of volumes that have snapshots, but not others. So I'm kind of in a quandary here of either breaking the API, which I really have resisted and have gotten away with for 2 years working on this, but I'm not sure what to do about this case in general, because eventually every deployment of Cinder is going to run into this problem once they start utilizing their storage to the full capacity, which most people should because they spend a lot of money on their storage arrays. And
I
they're very
kind of
expensive.
disagree on the part of they should utilize fully, because we did create the reserve precisely because when you're overcommitting, if everybody starts writing, if you utilize fully and you have thin volumes, then they will not be able to write, and Cinder, in that specific case, will not be able to do anything because it doesn't even know that the storage is being used. So
you still
I'm
can't
not
do a
saying
snapshot. You still can't take actions against these operations. And from a customer's perspective, that's the worst case scenario. And when you have as many deployments as I have, it's a real problem. So I'm trying to find out how to overcome that. In our case specifically, we use thick provisioning because we have an intermediary between Cinder and the actual storage backend, which is a NetApp. And so we have 400% overcommit between the NetApp and vCenter, VMware, and we don't want to do thin on top of that. So because that will cause a never-ending list of problems, thin on top of thin. So we do, from Cinder's perspective, it's thick on top of a thin provisioned data store to the NetApp. So, and we do use the reserve percentage, but the problem with the reserve percentage is it ultimately just makes the pool just smaller because Cinder won't allow you to do operations within that reserve percentage range, such as doing a backup, which will create a temporary snapshot, which will delete it. So theoretically, it could use that reserve percentage for those operations. But that also doesn't work. And just creating a generic snapshot that customers want to keep around, obviously that doesn't work either.
that's a bug because that was fixed like 3 years ago. I think, like Brian said in the user document, or we think we fixed it. That should have been fixed. I don't know if there's a configuration option or if it was generic, but there was a way to tell the scheduler, yeah, even if there's not enough room for a new volume, please allow a snapshot to keep being made because for whatever reason. So that one, I think it should have some way of getting done.
Okay. I think that might help backups, but just generic snapshots in itself, we could still get into a position. So snapshots aren't recorded as part of the allocated capacity against a particular backend. The only way snapshots are used within the calculation of the capacity factors of a particular pool is by how much free space is being reported. And in our case, snapshots are a full clone. So you could have 10 terabytes of volumes created, and if you snap all of those, then you actually have 20 terabytes being really consumed on the back end. And the scheduler does take that into consideration with my new code that's in there now, because it does look at what it thinks should be there versus what is actually reported as being consumed, and it takes the lesser of those two. So even if you have some phantom external entity writing data to your pool for whatever reason, it will take that into consideration. But the actual ability to allocate more snaps, which are clones, isn't looked at by the allocated capacity of a particular. So the reserve percentage is kind of irrelevant in that case. But overall, I need to have some sort of solution such that Cinder can either migrate things around when it's theoretically possible, such as a volume that has no snaps and you're trying to back it up, which it will create a temporary snapshot and then delete it later if it should migrate that first to one of the other pools that has capacity. Extend, we've actually solved, and I would like to push that upstream. So I think I have that one solved. But I think in general, it seems to me that if there is other pools on the same back end that have plenty of available capacity, that some of these actions should turn into an internal migration to allow them to complete, and such that a snapshot would always be successful in that case, and a backup would always be successful. Same with extend. It just might take a little while, but at least it would work from the customer's perspective. And that is what I mean by cloud-like.
Yeah. So from my point of view, this is not saying no to a feature or whatever. I'm just trying to say, first, the reason why this specific your users are thinking that this is not cloud-like is based on the decisions of the deployment in how things are being used, trying to fully utilize basically what you've described, the limitations of VMware, the limitations of the requirements from your company to fully utilize each of the pools and all that. So I wouldn't say that it's not cloud-like just because of some deployment things that have been chosen. But
so I would argue against that, because specifically I think eventually everybody will run into this if they have a limited number of pools where they start filling them up with provisioning requests. As soon as you hit a pool that has reached the reserved percentage, you're going to have problems with any volume that live inside that pool with any of these actions. We've just gotten there quicker because of some of our limitations in our deployment style, that's all.
But that's why there are all other other allocation scheduler drivers that they distribute the volumes evenly, and they do other ways of doing things so that you can add new pools and then they will go to a new one, so you keep everything even as you grow. But in any case, that was just something that kind of bothered me, not from what you were saying, but from what your customers were saying. It's like, what do you mean Cinder is not cloud-like just because of this? Anyway, from what you were describing of the automatic migration, I think I don't know if the code you have honors the type of the volume that is being migrated. So I don't know if it goes through the scheduler and says
to the scheduler.
that's the requirements of this volume that needs to be moved from pool A to pool B would it still be honored by the new pool? Let's say if I want a replicated volume and it goes to pool A because each pool A is being replicated. And now you want to move it to a pool that has a space. It needs to go through the scheduler because maybe pool B that is not replicated and that cannot be used because it would go against the volume type.
Yes, we go through the scheduler. We just send a normal migration request to the scheduler with an additional size requirement. So the scheduler will still pick based upon the volume type and all the attributes in the volume type, as well as the capabilities in the back end that support that volume type or not. So it still honors everything with respect to how the original volume was created. It's
Awesome.
purely just needs the space for the end resulting request. So in the case of volume extend, there's stuff inside the actual scheduler capacity filter that already knows that you're trying to do an extend, and you can have the original size of the volume plus the extra size. And when we ask it to migrate, it actually uses that. So it knows that the pool that it's picking to migrate it to can handle the volume as it is now, but also after the extend. And it's working great. We've had no complaints after we've put this into place. And so this has led me to believe, because we have problems with backup snapshots those are the two big ones for us. So
yeah, my concern
since we're doing all this work, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, my concern was not regarding whether the code works and it has no bugs, but whether if your approach met other deployments. And if you say you go through the normal scheduler, then it meets other deployments. That was my first question. The second one is, right now, for example, for retype, when it requires a migration, we fail because we don't want users to suddenly experience a quick operation, a slow operation when they thought it would be fast. We don't want it to think a retype is fast and suddenly it takes an hour to complete. That's why we have a specific parameter to say, yes, it is okay if a migration happens in this case. We have a specific one. But in all the operations you're saying, if I understood correctly, you want it to be hidden from the user that there might be a migration happening.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And hiding that from users, I'm not entirely sure if that idea would fit with the other ideas that we currently have, like the retype that you need to specify it's okay to migrate.
So I kind of have conflicting viewpoints about this. Is one from my old driver writing days and working on that side of Cinder versus an operator's perspective, right? So our end users don't really know about migrations. They're hidden from that because they can't execute them anyway. It's only me and other admins on my team that I give that permission to do these migrations, because volumes have to live in a place that they can be used and there's space for them. Customers don't care about that. They just want it to work. So we've already had discussions with them with respect to some operations taking time to complete because of limitations within vCenter, VMware. It's terrible. So our customers are already used to, hey, it would be nice if this was faster, but they care more about it just working than the speed of it. And that is our overarching issue that we have, is that it doesn't work now. Right now, the turnaround time is multiple days for their volume to get to work because I have to manually do all this work. And so I just think because of the work that we've been successful at with the Extend, it seems to make sense to put that in other areas. And if it could even be configurable, if that's something that you would be okay with, that's fine. But the argument with retype not doing an automatic migration is kind of annoying for users as well, because hey, that now they're preventing their volume from being retyped simply because it might take a little bit of time. And they have no
Yeah, but
idea
it
how to
might
do the
not be
migration.
just a little bit. It may take 3 hours. That's not a little bit.
Yeah.
From 3 seconds to 3 hours is not a little bit. Is if I ask an extend operation and it takes an hour or 2 hours to complete, something that I'm used to working in other OpenStack deployments and it takes 30 seconds to complete, then there is going to be a problem because I'm going to see it extended and I'm going to say, this is broken. Let me contact. So besides requiring a user message so that they can check and see, oh, it is saying that it's going to take a long time, I would argue that there are some expectations from users on how fast operations happen in OpenStack. And when we are not going to meet those expectations, that is when those configurable parameters are saying, I know that it's going to take forever, but I'm okay because, like you say, Walter, we want this just to happen. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going to start calling the operator, the system administrator, because this takes a while. I am aware that it's going to be slow, so it's fine. So how could we do both things? Allow the migration, like you say, because it is a valid use case. But we don't want that to inadvertently happen for a user that wanted it to be fast. I don't know how to say.
I see what you're saying, but from my personal experience of multiple different types of deployments from Cinder, not all deployments are equal. And yes, certain actions, even within a deployment using a 3PAR in the back end, some of those things can take hours upon hours because the 3PAR itself has a limitation on how many live actions that can be taken place on them. And it's one of the reasons why I fought against the people that took over my driver to get rid of that live capability within Cinder, because you can only do one or two at a time on this $1 million array. It's like, this is ridiculous. And so not all Cinder deployments are equal or should be considered to be equal. So the expectation that the speed of every action that you take on certain actions that you take on volume should be expected to be the same amount of time to complete. I think if there was a mechanism built into this automatic migration, and I still think that should be configurable, is some sort of status reporting, so that way you knew that, hey, this is like 30% complete, and you can pull it and continue to look at it and know that it's not stuck, and kind of guess how much, how long it might actually take to complete. But that has to be built into the migration code somewhere so that we can get the progress out of that. In terms of our API from VMware, we can actually provide that because it has status on the back end of the migration itself. I don't know about every other back end, but so I guess that's my compromise that I can come up with off the top of my head is one is allow it to be configurable to take these automatic migrations underneath the covers. as well as maybe provide eventually a mechanism to provide the actual status or the progress of the migration itself. Because Cinder right now doesn't report that. It just says migrating on the status, and that's really annoying for me, especially because I'm doing hundreds of these migrations every day, all day long, and I've written a tool that I can find out, how long it's going to take for a migration to complete, so I know that it's not stuck, and I have that from the command line. But anyway,
I
I
would
don't know
say
how to
that,
solve this for everyone, for all
that
cases, especially in the case where you already have an existing snapshot on a volume. You can't migrate that from the Cinder API perspective, and there's reasons why we don't do that now. So that will still be a failure case.
yeah. So I was thinking that maybe the progress, I think it is the progress you were suggesting to have. It is a nice thing, but probably requires more code than just a simple user message saying undergoing this operation. It's going to take a while. Seems kind of an easier compromise to provide some feedback to the users. And the other side, I don't know how we should configure this thing to, if it should be something in a volume type, saying the volume from this pool can move to other pools, something like that, that the system administrator creates, so that it can
Yeah,
say some are okay, others are not okay, in case they need to differentiate between them, or if we should just make it global.
yeah, I don't know, because thinking about this more, it does literally change the expectation of the API for some of these commands, right? You do an extend volume, currently it will just fail if there's not enough space. And from the user's perspective, you don't know whether it's the storage array behind it or if it's a pool behind it or whatever. It just fails if there's not space. And in our case, I think we just responded with, "Hey, we accepted your request," and I think that may be what is already returned, because that extend operation can still take time on the back end. But the API changes will need to be accounted for in the case of doing a snapshot, because I think the expectation for snapshots right now is that it is really quick. Except for some backends where they do a full clone, then it's never fast. So I kind of like the idea of having it in the volume type itself, because then it's type configurable. And in our deployment, I'm probably going to end up, I have 2 volume types right now, and I'm probably going to end up with a third here within another year. But I'd still want the ability to migrate even those as well. So yeah, it would probably be enabled in all 3 of my volume types. So in my case, having a global, it makes sense. I just don't know if that works for everybody. I think it's probably safer to have it in the volume type than making it global, because you could have several backends where,
Well, we could
well,
even
LVM
default
right now does not support
a
pools.
default. We could have a default on the configuration file, and then can be overridden by the volume type. So,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that could work.
but yeah, I think from my point of view, as long as we did those things, go through a scheduler, which you already do, have some way to get feedback to a user that it's going to take longer, and be able to configure this so that it can behave in deployments as it used to be, I'm fine with implementing this nice feature.
Okay.
So I had one question. Maybe this was discussed in the past. So when one volume is being migrated, so if one pool is full and we are migrating a volume to allow the creation operation, and that migration fails in between. So what do we do about that?
Uh, well, it gets put into migration error state, and I think in that case you end up with, depending upon where the failure is, it's kind of hard if you're in the middle of copying bits, or if the back end was in the middle of copying bits, it kind of is up to it to determine how to clean up or not. But the volume will be left in uh, error migrating, but the maintenance tag on the status will get removed and put back to what it was originally. So in our case, for extending an attached volume that has to get migrated, it will go back to in use, but error migrating state. And the original source volume will be untouched.
Okay.
But one thing regarding what Rajat just asked, if we had an available volume and we requested an extend and it had to migrate, and then the volume would end up with error migrating, as a user, I would say, what? What just happened? What do you mean error migrating? I asked for an extend operation. That
Yeah.
would be weird.
The normal status is still would go back to available, and the overall extend obviously would fail. Um, but this is a new capability within Cinder that we're going to allow migrations during these commands. So I don't know how else we're supposed to handle this particular situation. Because error migrating
Well,
really doesn't do a heck of a lot in terms of the capabilities of being able to take actions on a particular volume, because the status itself is back to what it originally was. Can end users see that error migrating status? I don't know if end users can. Sorry, I'm just looking at some volumes here real quick. I don't see the migration status as an end user. It's only as an admin. So end users would just see that it failed, which is no worse than it is today. So what I think I will do then, if everybody is okay with this idea in general, is that I will rework my patch that I have for migrate during extend that my coworker Marius did, and I will push that upstream and get all the unit tests and all that stuff working with it. And then the only other thing that we're not doing now that you requested is some user message being sent after it's originally failed to extend because there's not enough space, and we've requested the scheduler to migrate the volume. This extend migrate is actually the easiest use case with internally in Cinder. Extending on snapshot is quite a bit more complicated, because if there's existing snapshots, and I was looking at the code, the very first thing that the API does for doing a snapshot is it creates a database record for the snapshot. So trying to migrate with that in place will fail 100% of the time. So I have to do something to get that checked to see if there's existing snapshots to ignore that one somehow, because we need the original ID. And if you delete it, you're going to get a new ID later. And so anyway, that's going to take a little bit more effort to deal with that one.
I feel like we should probably get a spec on this. Sorry for
Yeah.
for doing it, but yeah, because we are going to want to have this properly spelled out for future reference. Because yeah,
Okay. All right. So I'll create a spec for the extend use case and then put up the patch for that. And then we'll go through that. And then, unfortunately, I need some solution right now for my snapshot issue, but I don't even have a patch in place that I could say that would be even workable at this point. So I'm doing the manual migration dance right now across 2,500 pools.
yeah. I
It's
don't
painful.
think we should probably, to make this easier, we don't need a spec for all the operations you're thinking of, just one by one, because like you say, the snapshot case is more problematic. We can start with extend, and the spec just covers extend and maybe mentions
Okay.
the other ones. Yeah.
Okay. That's easy enough to do.
Yeah.
I appreciate the discussion and the buy-in on this, though, because this is a major problem for us. And I still personally believe that any deployment will eventually get to this point. It's just a matter of time, depending upon how utilized your deployment is and how many users are using it. When we're developing using DevStack or even small deployments, it's going to be hard to run into. But once you get to a pool that is actually fully utilized, you will have all these problems for sure.
My concern is you're the canary in the coal mine. Give an operator plus development experience.
Yes, it's actually surprising to me that this hasn't happened already, considering the state of how Cinder works. And storage is expensive. It's really expensive, and it would be much easier for me to just throw more millions of dollars at more storage arrays and make this go away. But we have budgets, and and I think I don't know how our deployment compares to others, but it's pretty damn big.
Out of curiosity, is it more expensive to utilize all the pools that you have to the same amount of space than it is to just use 80% of them to the full capacity like you are doing now? Is it more expensive to even out the space that is used?
So it's not necessarily, that's not the right question actually in our case, and I'll explain why. We have the ability to create a very large volume. A 10 terabyte volume is the maximum that we allow to be created. And so in this case, we always have to have some of our pools free enough to create the largest volume possible. Because a customer wants to create a 10 terabyte volume, we need to ensure that we have a pool available that can create that. So we can't fully utilize and spread out 100% evenly across all of our pools because of that.
Yeah.
So
Patient. Yep.
So therein lies the problem. I could probably do some more scheduler tricks within the Wire and stuff, and I've tried that a little bit, and it just buys us a little bit of time. It doesn't fix this problem, and
Yeah.
I want a fix for this problem forever.
No, I was just wondering why it was being done like that. But yeah, it is clear. You allow very big volumes, and they need to be on the same pool. That is no question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Our largest pool that we create is 30 terabytes, and the largest volume that we allow to be created is 10, and then we have a 20% reserve space, so you can create 2 of those. After you create 2 of those on that pool, you can't do anything else there. You're hosed. Yep. I think
I
that's
have a
about all I had on this topic, unless anybody else has more questions or anything like that.
I have a generic question about our scheduler, and it might be a stupid one as well. So currently we do the filtering and weighing based on the backends, and the capacity being reported for that particular backend. And inside that backend, we have multiple pools. So is there no way to apply the same like capacity filter or weigher on the pools instead of the backend? Like when we select a backend, after that we could filter out the pools based on the
The
filters.
capacity calculations and factors are calculated per pool. So as far as the scheduler is concerned, every pool is its own unique backend with its own unique capacity and capabilities.
Okay.
So theoretically, you could report different capabilities on every single pool, and those would be all of that would be completely valid and considered by the scheduler itself.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Sure. Okay, so I have a couple action items. I'll create a spec for the extend operation, and then I'll put up the pull pull request, the the review for it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Walt, for bringing this up.
Thank you, guys.
So I guess we can take a 10 or 15-minute break before the next topic.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, then we can return at 1500 UTC, I guess. Yeah. So we will return at 1500 UTC to discuss the next topic.